Brothers and sisters, comrades, greetings from the Fire Brigades Union. Now, Kevin Maguire earlier said that the police had said there was 100,000 on this march. Well, my delegation haven't even reached the park as yet, so I'd say to our colleagues in the police that there's some problem with numeracy. Perhaps it's down to the education cuts that have already been in place. There's far, far more than that on this demonstration today. Politicians like praising our members when we turn out to fires, floods, explosions and so on, but at the same time they are devastating our service up and down the country. They are closing fire stations, getting rid of fire engines, getting rid of firefighters' jobs. Just this week we hear in the press that 17 fire stations in London, in the capital city, are under threat of closure and 600 firefighters' jobs to go in the capital city. That's an utter disgrace. It's the same story all over the country, in all our towns and cities, and that will mean when David Cameron says he'll protect frontline services, what planet is he on? Because that will mean it will take longer and longer when you dial 999 for firefighters to come out and deal with that emergency. What an absolute and utter scandal. So we urge you to support us in our campaigns as we support everyone in any area of public life defending public services or fighting for a decent wage or fighting to defend their pensions, because we don't believe austerity and cuts are necessary at all. Not one cut is necessary. We paid, you paid, your families and your colleagues paid to bail out the banks. You paid once, and now you're being asked to pay again through seeing your wages fall, your pensions ripped up and your jobs and futures destroyed. Well, instead of bailing out the banks, I say we should take them over and run them as a democratic public service. We've got a government of the rich, by the rich and for the rich. And we need people fighting for our people as strong as they do for theirs. We will need to fight of our lives over the next period, and that will mean industrial action. It will mean greater and greater coordination and generalised action. And that won't just come from the top, that will only come if that's discussed and debated in every single workplace across the UK. We will need not just trade unions involved, we want our other people, young people, unemployed people, pensioners and students. We need community action. And yes, I believe we need direct action. If they're going to close our hospitals, if they're going to close our youth centres or our schools, then I think it's perfectly reasonable that people step in and say, you're not closing them, we're occupying them to defend them. After all, isn't that the big society in action, us standing up for ourselves and defending our communities? These people will tell us there's no alternative. Well, they've told us that throughout history. If we'd listened to them in the past, you never would have won the right to vote. You never would have won the right to be in a trade union. We never would have won our health service or our education service. So don't listen to them when they say there's no alternative. We've only ever made progress when we've stood up ourselves and said we set in our own alternative, and then we fought for it. That's the challenge today and going forward. Thank you very much.
Where 1 in every 7 young people are unemployed. I've been unemployed myself for 14 months since leaving sixth form. It's hard waking up every day without a job to go to and living without a wage, without money to go out to see my friends or have a life. I don't even feel like me anymore. I've been very active in seeking employment and applied for a countless number of different jobs in all different areas. I'm doing everything I can to be more employable. I volunteer every week in a local charity shop, and as the lady says, I'm an active member of Wolverhampton City Youth Council. It feels like a kick in the teeth when you don't get response to all the job applications you send off, and it's demoralising when you find out that 200 people are applying for 2 jobs in the company. Signing on for job seekers allowance is a depressing experience. No one would choose a life on JSA. I would like to see how the ministers would cope if they were forced to live on £56.25 a week. I think the government promotes a bad image of young people as lazy and not wanting to work.
Must not have are the rising food prices, the falling incomes for poor people, increasing unemployment and the cuts in public services. This is all creating a perfect storm for the poor. We've had a 30% increase in food prices over the last 5 years and only a 12% increase in the national minimum wage. We've had the loss of about 830,000 full-time permanent jobs in this country and the creation of only 500,000 part-time jobs. We have a situation where workers' rights in Mexico are better than workers' rights in the UK. We have to stop this trend and move back to one of greater equality between us. One thing that we can all do now is we can back the Robin Hood tax and make sure that this government and the Labour Party institute a Robin Hood tax that will take and redistribute the wealth from the socially useless investment of high-frequency traders in the City of London, and instead give that money and invest that money in ending poverty in this country, in building the green economy, and in bringing back our public services.
I come to talk to you about David Cameron, our friend David Cameron. I thought you could please. That man who says he wants to spread privilege to all of us. But I tell you, the only thing that his education policy has done for this country has been to spread ignorance. And the only government I know that is going in the wrong direction on that is this one. Only this government, which is spending more on youth unemployment than it is on youth education. And that's what government is doing. That is our government. Only this government, which believes that education for the few is what will make the UK better, what has actually made UK higher education the most expensive in the world. That's the government that we have. And only this government that is so lost touch with reality that it claims that the best way out of recession is to cut public services for the poor in order to pay for tax cuts for the rich. And that's this government, and I tell you, that's why this government has to go. Comrades, you judge a society on how it looks after those who are most vulnerable, those who are most in need. But this government is denying our people opportunities to get jobs or education, and then having the nerve to portray them as lazy and feckless. This government that has long-term youth unemployment in England increasing by over 20% since it started, and at the same time cutting support for youth unemployed by the same 20%. This government that has taken away grants in further education for those who need it, made it more difficult for adults to get back into retraining, made it possible only for those who can afford 3 times what it used to cost to go to university to be able to make that choice based on ability and not ability to pay. That is this government, that is this government that we will fight, that is this government that the trade union movement opposes, that is the government that we will march against, organise against and fight against. If we are here again in a year, fine, we'll be here again. If we're here again a year after that, fine, we'll be here again. But I tell you what, come the election, this government will not be here, but trade unions will, because trade unions will organise to get rid of them. Thank you for being here.
The 2010 election, as you all remember, was this strange election where essentially the frontbench spokespeople for both parties, Conservative and Labour, were promising a degree of austerity, and indeed Alistair Darling promised more austerity than Margaret Thatcher put forward. And the result of the election was inconclusive, and we had a coalition government which has now gone heavily into austerity. Now, the austerity is, yes, about public spending cuts, and we know a great deal about what's happening with those, and there's a lot more to come. But it's also, as with Greece, a complete reconfiguring of society. It is increasing the tax burden on the poorest, increasing the tax burden on low-income consumers, decreasing the tax burden on the very wealthy, and despite sort of big talk, is basically encouraging the continuation of tax havens and tax avoidance schemes. The opposition to the austerity was initially in Britain fairly limited, and hats off, congratulations to the students that started the opposition to austerity over the massive hike in student fees in straight after the election 2010-2011. So we have to face the fact that there has been a slow growth of opposition to the cuts, and it is gathering pace. The formation of the coalition of resistance has been a very good thing because it's given a point of focus and a point of information and brought unions and community campaigns together in a way in previous periods of austerity that has not always been the case. The unions have seen themselves as box one, community organisations as box two, and I think the strength of the march last year and yesterday's march are very, very important. But the political pressure is got to be on in the unions and in the Labour Party for an alternative economic strategy. It's all very well for Ed Miliband to say that he's against the degree of austerity imposed by the Tory government, but he would have a different form of austerity. Well, if the austerity is cutting defence expenditure, cutting Trident, cutting nuclear weapons, we can all agree with that, and I would absolutely welcome that and applaud that, likewise withdrawing from Afghanistan and so on. But I suspect it's not going to be like that. It's going to be something rather different. There are contradictory pressures. The Labour Party conference was forced into a position of voting for the repeal of the National Health Service reforms, so-called, crucial, but there are a whole lot of other areas of benefit caps and benefit cuts that are going on. I'll finish on this point, Chris, that people that are suffering the worst degree of austerity, those on housing benefit cuts, young people using benefit, students and so on, are often the most isolated, not students, but others are often in the most isolated position, particularly private sector tenants. The question is uniting people in some sense of defending the principles of a national health service, the principles of a welfare state, and the principles of public investment in infrastructure and industry. None of this is new. It's happened all over the world before Europe was hit by these austerity programs. That was the agenda of the International Monetary Fund. We have to stand for a clear economic alternative, which is public ownership and control of the financial system, in order to provide for the kind of cohesive provision of education, welfare and housing that we all aspire to for every one of our citizens in every one of our countries. Unity in and out of the Eurozone, unity across Europe is crucial in this period. Thank you very much.